something a little bit different today. I am headed to New York City this weekend, so I thought it would be fun to take you along with me and then share some books with you, some picture books that take place in the Big Apple. So I have this big collection of books, and they were actually a lot more than I realized, and there are some really neat books in this collection. But I thought of this idea because I personally live out in the country. I'm surrounded by trees and I drive everywhere. There's nothing within walking distance except my neighbors. So I thought it would be neat to share books with you, especially if you live in a rural area, to show students what the city looks like. Picture books are such a great way to introduce students to bigger things, to new places that they don't necessarily experience in their everyday life. So why don't you come along with me to New York City, and then when I get back, I will share those books with you. Let's go. Okay, I'm back, but before we jump into the picture books, I have kind of a funny story to share with you. As I mentioned before, I live in the country. I don't walk anywhere, I drive everywhere. There are no big buildings around me. But I haven't been to New York City in years, and I've really only been once or twice by myself. But this time I said, you know what, I'm feeling confident. I got off the train at Penn Station and I started walking very confidently in the direction of my hotel. I'm looking at the signs and I'm seeing, okay, 36th Street, 37th Street, 38th Street. Wait a minute, my hotel is back on 32nd Street. I had to start all over and go backwards. But let me know if you've ever got lost in the city so that I don't feel quite so alone. But no worries, I found my way. It was all good. I had a great weekend, and now let me share those books with you. This first one is a nonfiction book, but it is one of my favorites, and it is perfect for right now, for November. This one is called Balloons Over Broadway, and this one is perfect for November because it's all about the puppeteer Tony Sarge, who created the balloons that we see every year in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. It is so neat to go behind the scenes and learn how these balloons came to be, and your students will love not only reading the book, but then seeing them on TV and be able to share all of that information with their families when they're watching the parade. So of course, this one takes place in New York City because it's part of the parade that happens every year on Thanksgiving Day in New York City. And it's a really neat book to share with students. And I actually have a free interactive read aloud lesson to go along with it. And I'll leave a link to that in the description box down below so that you can read this with your students and then do the lesson with them all together as a class. Okay, this next book, I can't believe I've never read before. I've heard so much about it, but I had never picked it up and read it. And I actually ended up buying it instead of borrowing it from the library like I do with all my other books because I want to share it with my own kids and keep it as part of our Christmas collection. This one is called Red and Lulu. Red and Lulu is about two birds who live out in the country, kind of like me. And they live in this tree, and their favorite time of year is Christmas when people come around and sing Christmas carols. But one day, Red sets out to find some breakfast and Lulu stays behind in their nest. While he's gone, somebody comes and cuts down the tree and takes it away. And Lulu is still in the tree, and Red follows her because he doesn't want to be separated, and he follows her as far as he can go. He's calling her name, and then one day, he finally hears her sounds again, her singing. Lulu is in the tree at Rockefeller Center, that giant Christmas tree that's there every year. And he finally is so excited to be reunited with her. and the two of them decide that they love the sights and the sounds of New York City, and they end up staying there and making their home there. This is a great book to read in December to help students know all about New York City, especially at this wonderful time of year. Now, another book that I had never read before but had heard a lot about, and I finally picked it up, and it is a wonderful book, but I will warn you, it did make me cry. This one is called Ida Always, and it's about two polar bears who live in the Central Park Zoo. Their names are Gus and Ida, and every day they wake up and they play together and they eat together and they watch all the people walk by as they walk through Central Park. But then one day, Ida gets really sick. The zookeeper tells Gus that she's not going to get better. So he helps take care of her as she gets more and more sick, and then one day she dies, and Gus feels really lonely without her. And he misses her and that time that they spent together. But he knows that she's always with him, and he remembers all of the good times that they had together. This is based on a true story, and again, it gives that information about New York City, about the sights and the sounds, but also has a wonderful story to go along with it. Another book that I highly recommend as a read aloud for your classroom. Okay, now I have another one of my favorites. I told you I had a lot of favorites in this collection. This one is called The Curious Garden, and I have a free lesson to go along with this one too. It's mostly about Earth Day, but you can still use it with the book because it is such a great read aloud. This is about a young boy who lives in a dark, dirty city, but then one day he finds this bloom of a flower, and he thinks, what would happen if I took care of this flower? What would happen if I watered it and talked to it and spent time with it? What would happen? And as he starts to do that, more and more flowers grow, and he learns all about planting and taking care of plants and what happens when winter comes, and then in the springtime, how it all comes back again if you're taking care of it. And his garden grows and grows and grows and eventually takes over the city, and it becomes this beautiful area that was once this dark, dreary space. And as I was reading this for the first time, it made me think of the High Line in Manhattan. I had once walked the High Line, which is this old rundown train track that wasn't used anymore, and they turned it into a public space that you can walk along, and there's beautiful gardens. And then when I got to the end of the story, there's an author's note about how it's based on the High Line in Manhattan, and the similarities are there. So again, this one showing students the different sides of the city, how it sometimes can be a dark, dirty place, but then other times you can find that beautiful aspects of the busy city, even in between all of these big, tall buildings. Another great one to read aloud with your class. This next book I had never heard about, but again, it's another true story, and I found it really interesting. This one is called 21 Elephants, and it's about the building of the Brooklyn Bridge. So back in the late 1800s, the Brooklyn Bridge was constructed. It took over 14 years to just build this bridge, this amazing thing connecting two cities together for the first time. And once it was constructed, people thought it was amazing, it was wonderful. Was it strong enough to hold people? And so they didn't know what to do to figure that out. And then P.T. Barnum had this idea that he would lead his elephants, his 21 elephants, across the bridge to show people how strong this bridge was. And it talks about in the author's note how elephants have this instinct that when they step onto something or before they step onto something, they know if it's going to be strong enough for them or not. But these elephants all walked across this bridge. All 21 of them stood on the Brooklyn Bridge, and the bridge was still standing. So a really interesting book about this amazing piece of architecture and how it came to be and how things were different years and years ago, how they tested things in different ways, and how it was such a unique way to do that. I think your students will find this one really interesting. The next book that I have made me wish that I visited the New York Public Library while I was in the city, but alas, I ran out of time. But this one is called Lost in the Library, and and this one is by Josh Funk, and it is about patience and fortitude, the two lions that stand guarding the New York Public Library. And it talks about how these lions come to life at night, but in the morning they stand guard, waiting for all of the people to come into the library to visit them. But one night, early in the morning as the sun is rising, Fortitude realizes that Patience is missing. And so he's thinking, oh no, she needs to be here to guard the library before people start to arrive. So he runs into the library, he goes through all the different sections, and he talks to the different statues and paintings and asks them if they've seen Patience. And he's getting more and more nervous, worried that he's never going to see her again. He thinks about the fun times they've had and all the stories that she's told him. And then he finally finds her in the children's section of the library, and he finds her reading books. And what he realizes is that all the stories that she's told him, she has gotten from the books that she's read every night in the children's section of the library, which I just thought was an amazing story. So a great book about library and how much books can bring to you. And it's really neat to kind of get a glimpse inside the New York Public Library, especially if you've never been there before. And this last book I have shared before. This one I have shared in my September 11th Read Aloud books. So I'll leave a link to that in the description box below if you're looking for more books about September 11th to share with your students. But I couldn't have a video about New York City without sharing something about 9/11. So this very tree is about a tree that had been planted between the Twin Towers and had brought shade and wonderfulness to people for so long. And then September 11th happened. And as the towers fell, it buried this tree underneath it. But then as the rescue workers started to unearth everything, they realized that the tree was still alive. And so they took it and they brought it to a nursery where this tree was nursed back to health. And then they returned it back to its spot by where the Twin Towers used to stand. This is another true story, but it's told in words that students will understand, and it touches upon the heroic acts and the emotions that were felt on 9/11 without going into too much detail. So it's a great one to share with students. And I have a free interactive read aloud to go along with this one as well, so I'll leave that in the description box below. So I had a great trip to New York City and I can't wait to go back again. But I hope that you'll be able to share some of these books that take place in the city with your students to help them learn about the culture of the Big Apple, of what the city means to the people that live there or who visit often, especially if you are from a more rural area and your students don't get to see these big bridges or these big buildings on a regular basis. And stay tuned for next week because I have a video with books all about showing gratitude and being thankful, which is perfect for the month of November. Have a great week.